Imagine a single rejection letter from an art school igniting a global inferno that consumed millions. What if that ambitious young man had been accepted as a painter instead of becoming history's greatest tyrant? This story is not just a documentation of wars, but an autopsy of a human soul turned into a machine of mass destruction. We will step behind the curtain to understand how historical coincidence and psychological trauma created a monster who spared no one. In a quiet Austrian village, the child who would later shatter the global balance of power was born. No one could have imagined that this infant would one day become the greatest nightmare of the European continent. Adolf grew up under the weight of a strict and tyrannical father who sanctified order and despised his artistic dreams. His mother, Clara, was the only sanctuary that softened the harshness of life and the beatings of his childhood. The death of his younger brother left a deep scar on his soul and turned him into a very introverted child. The family moved to the city of Linz, where the features of his rebellious and stubborn personality began to form. His repeated academic failure was not mental incapacity, but a rebellion against a reality he never loved. After his father's sudden death, Adolf felt a strange kind of liberation mixed with total loss and fragmentation. He departed for Vienna, carrying his brush and grand dreams of becoming a famous and prestigious architectural artist. He stood before the Academy of Fine Arts with a heart beating with hope, but faced flat rejection twice. The professors told him his talent lay in architecture, not painting, but he refused to believe that reality. This moment was the first historical coincidence that changed the course of human history into an eternal bitterness. The young dreamer turned into a homeless man living in shelters and scavenging for food in Vienna's streets. In those poor alleys, the seeds of hatred and extremism began to grow gradually and powerfully in his mind. He watched the ethnic conflicts in the Austrian Empire and began to hate multiculturalism in all its forms. He read extremist philosophical and political books that shaped his doctrine of racial superiority and sacred German blood. He fled military service in Austria because he did not want to fight alongside other perceived inferior races. He settled in Munich, Germany, where he finally found an environment that matched his very extremist nationalist aspirations. World War I suddenly broke out, acting as the only savior from his personal loss, poverty, and homelessness. He rushed to volunteer for the Bavarian army, considering the war a chance to prove his deep nationalist loyalty. In the trenches, he found the family he lacked and felt for the first time his life had meaning. He worked as a runner delivering messages between trenches amidst a barrage of endless bullets and explosions. He miraculously survived death several times, which reinforced his belief that he was protected by special divine care. He earned the Iron Cross for his bravery, despite his humble rank which never exceeded that of a corporal. Ironically, the officer who nominated him for this high medal was actually a German Jew serving his country. He suffered temporary blindness following a poisonous gas attack in the final, very harsh days of the war. While lying in the hospital, he received the news of Germany's humiliating surrender in the Campine forest. He felt a massive psychological shock and believed the German army was stabbed in the back by traitors. That critical moment was the final psychological shift from a loyal soldier to a very resentful politician. He decided on his sickbed to dedicate his life to restoring Germany's dignity lost in the war. He returned to Munich, which was boiling with conflicts between communists and extreme nationalists in the dark streets. The military intelligence appointed him as an informant to monitor the small emerging political parties after the defeat. He entered an old tavern to monitor the German Workers' Party, but found himself preaching passionately to them. That night, he discovered his extraordinary power to influence the masses through his hysterical tone of voice. The party leaders were attracted to his fiery speech and decided to include him in their humble ranks. He began to change the party structure entirely and chose the swastika as a symbol of dark power. He transformed the small party into a mass movement relying on oratory and precisely organized military displays. He established shock troops to protect his meetings and suppress his opponents with force and intimidation everywhere. He exploited the stifling economic crisis and poverty to promote promises of prosperity and coming German greatness. He planned a military coup in Munich with General Ludendorff to overthrow the weak and decaying government. The famous beer hall putsch failed, and his comrades fell to police bullets in the streets of Munich. Hitler fled the scene but was arrested days later at the home of one of his close friends. He faced a charge of high treason, which normally carried the death penalty in that very critical period. He turned his trial into a platform for political propaganda, gaining the sympathy of judges and the public. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but served only 9 months through political mediation. In his cell at Landsberg prison, he wrote his famous book, Mein Kampf, summarizing his extremist ideas. He realized that the path to power must be through the ballot box, not through failed military coups. He left prison to find the party in disarray, but he rebuilt it with an iron fist. He began building a massive propaganda apparatus based on brainwashing the youth and deifying the future leader. Germany was on a date with a dark fate while Hitler prepared to seize the right moment. Hitler emerged from prison into a world that had shifted during his months behind bars. Germany was experiencing a brief period of economic stability that made extremist rhetoric seem unnecessary. The Führer realized he had to wait for the state to collapse to reappear as a savior. He reorganized the Nazi Party into a disciplined political army under his absolute and final command. He founded the Hitler Youth to plant his ideas in the minds of the next generation. He used a private plane for travel, becoming the first politician to use modern technology wisely. Joseph Goebbels was the mastermind who transformed Hitler from a mere orator into a living god. The Great Depression of 1929 was the historical coincidence that changed everything for him. Germany drowned in a sea of unemployment and poverty, giving Hitler a chance to return. He exploited the misery of millions, convincing them that democracy was the cause of their hunger. The number of Nazi seats in the parliament began to increase terrifyingly with every new election. The party transformed from a marginal group into the most powerful force on the angry streets. Hitler refused any position lower than the chancellorship, appearing extremely confident in his destined power. The old German elite despised him, calling him the little Austrian corporal who lacked political depth. Conspiracies were hatched in closed rooms by traditional politicians who thought they could control him. President Hindenburg believed he could tame Hitler by placing him under close and constant supervision. Coincidence led conservative politicians to think they were using Hitler while he was using them all. On the 30th of January 1933, the dream that once seemed impossible finally came true. Hitler marched through the halls of the Chancellery victorious while crowds cheered his name in Berlin. This was not the end, but the true beginning of dismantling the democratic state from within. The Reichstag fire incident arrived like a gift from heaven for Hitler to declare emergency law. He used the fire to accuse communists and begin a massive arrest campaign against all opponents. He passed the Enabling Act, granting himself absolute dictatorial powers without needing parliament or the president. Within a few months, Germany transformed from a parliamentary republic into a one-party totalitarian state. A purging process began within the party itself to eliminate any potential rival to his power. During the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler eliminated his old friend Ernst Röhm and rivals. Hitler proved he knew no loyalty and that survival belonged only to the most ruthless person. President Hindenburg died, allowing Hitler to merge the offices of Chancellor and President into himself. He forced army officers to swear a personal oath of loyalty to him instead of the state. The German military machine began turning in secret to break the humiliating terms of the Versailles Treaty. His eyes were fixed on the map of Europe, dreaming of reclaiming lost German territories and pride. He withdrew from the League of Nations to declare that Germany no longer followed international laws. He unleashed the Gestapo to hunt every free voice and turned society into a giant prison. Racial laws began to tighten the noose around Jews, stripping them of their citizenship and rights. The regime's propaganda portrayed Hitler as a kind father and a genius who never made mistakes. Coincidence made the great powers remain silent, following a policy of appeasement toward his early violations. He remilitarized the Rhineland in a military gamble that could have ended his career if challenged. The cowardice of his opponents gave Hitler confidence that no one would stop his expansionist ambitions. Germany became a massive workshop for building roads and war factories to eliminate all national unemployment. The world was deceived by Germany's civilized appearance during the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Behind those bright appearances were torture cells and concentration camps filling with innocent freethinkers. Hitler began to trust his personal intuition more than the advice of his veteran military generals. He formed the Berlin-Rome axis with Mussolini to strengthen fascist influence in a fragmented European continent. Austria was his next target to achieve the dream of greater German unity under his banner. He entered Vienna as a conqueror amidst loud cheering that made him forget his youthful bitterness. The failed artist became the master of the nation that once rejected him as a student. His appetite for power did not stop there, but extended to the neighboring lands of Czechoslovakia. At the Munich conference, leaders of Britain and France surrendered to his demands for false peace. Hitler returned to Berlin feeling he had played the world's strongest men like small chess pieces. Europe was now on the edge of the abyss while Hitler prepared for the final strike. Hitler signed a non-aggression pact with Stalin in a move that completely shocked the political world. This alliance between opposites was a political coincidence that paved the way for dividing Eastern Europe. He saw this agreement as a chance to avoid the two-front war that destroyed Germany previously. On the 1st of September 1939, German cannons began the assault on the Polish border. The Nazis claimed a fake Polish attack to justify their brutal invasion to the global public. Poland fell under the weight of the blitzkrieg tactic that surprised military experts across the globe. The world began to realize that Hitler was not just a politician, but a destructive hurricane. Britain and France declared war, but remained in a cold wait behind the fortified Maginot Line. The Führer exploited this temporary quiet to focus his strike toward the resource-rich European north. Denmark and Norway fell to ensure the flow of Swedish iron to German war factories. Hitler grew increasingly confident in his military intuition after every rapid victory he achieved. Eyes turned toward the Western Front where France prepared for a long, traditional defensive battle. Hitler ignored his generals' traditional plans and approved the crossing of the impossible Ardennes forest. A weather coincidence helped hide the movement of German tanks behind very thick forest fog. French defenses collapsed in a few weeks in the biggest military surprise of modern times. British forces were trapped in Dunkirk while Hitler hesitated to issue the final extermination order. This rare psychological hesitation allowed hundreds of thousands of soldiers to escape across the English Channel. On the 14th of June, Nazi forces entered Paris to raise the swastika over the Eiffel. Hitler danced with joy before cameras in a moment embodying his peak victory over history. He forced France to sign the surrender in the same carriage that witnessed Germany's old defeat. This symbolic revenge revealed the depth of the psychological complexes driving Hitler's fateful decisions. Hitler became the undisputed master of Europe while Britain stood alone in the burning field. The Führer believed Churchill would quickly sue for peace after the fall of his strong ally. The German Air Force began bombing British cities to pave the path for a naval invasion. The resilience of British pilots and civilians under fire broke Nazi air pride for the first time. Hitler decided to postpone the invasion of Britain to focus on his oldest dream in the East. He began planning the invasion of the Soviet Union, viewing it as essential living space. His generals warned against opening a second front, but the arrogance of power blinded his vision. He saw Stalin as an ideological enemy who must be crushed along with communism and Judaism. The geographical coincidence of Russia waited for Hitler with its merciless and freezing winter cold. Resentment and suspicion grew in Hitler toward anyone who questioned his grand and flawed strategic vision. The features of the final solution began to crystallize in his mind to eliminate perceived enemies. concentration camps transformed from political prisons into factories of organized human death and mass destruction. Hitler's decisions drifted away from military reality and drowned in false illusions of grand, eternal glory. He launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941 with the participation of millions of German soldiers. German forces achieved massive progress initially, making the fall of Moscow seem very imminent and certain. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse like a house of cards at the first strike. But vast spaces and desperate resistance began to drain the capabilities of the advanced German army. The first signs of fatigue appeared on the soldiers while the Russian winter approached very fast. Hitler refused to allow a tactical retreat and ordered his soldiers to stand until the death. The relationship between Hitler and his staff became strained due to his constant interference in details. Political coincidence led Japan to attack Pearl Harbor, pushing Hitler to declare war on America. This decision was strategic suicide that placed vast United States resources in the hands of enemies. The world was now burning in a total war led by one man's impulsive decisions. Hitler began living in his own world inside bunkers away from the noise of burning fronts. His physical health deteriorated, and he began suffering from mysterious tremors and various medical addictions. The Battle of Stalingrad was the psychological turning point where Hitler realized the meaning of defeat. He insisted on no surrender in Stalingrad, leading to the destruction of an elite German army. The aura of the invincible Führer began to fade in the eyes of the exhausted people. This was the end of the beginning for the fall of the man who ruled destiny. The battlefronts began to close in on the Third Reich, while Hitler grew increasingly isolated from reality. His generals' reports annoyed him, so he surrounded himself only with those who brought good news. He believed new secret weapons would flip the scales of war in his favor at the last moment. The Battle of Kursk failed to regain the initiative, and the army entered a bitter defensive state. The Allies began invading Italy, leading to the fall of his friend Mussolini to angry Italian rebels. Hitler ordered a daring rescue of Mussolini to show the world he never abandons his loyal allies. But the truth was that Germany was draining its resources on multiple and geographically distant fronts. On the 6th of June 1944, the Great Landing in Normandy began the end of control. Hitler refused to send reinforcements in the early hours, thinking the landing was just a tactical trick. This coincidence in military judgment gave the Allies a firm foothold on the exhausted European continent. Conspiracies increased within the army to kill Hitler and save what remained of the shattered state. Colonel von Stauffenberg executed an assassination attempt by placing a bomb under a fortified meeting table. Hitler miraculously survived thanks to a heavy wooden table leg that shielded him from the direct blast. Surviving the explosion turned him into a more delusional man, convinced of his own divine invincibility. He launched a brutal purge against his officers, executing thousands of suspects in the most horrific ways. German cities began turning into ruins under the weight of continuous day and night aerial bombardment. Hitler refused to see the destruction in his cities and banned films of the ruin from him. He ordered the recruitment of children and the elderly into the People's Army to defend falling Berlin. Soviet forces were advancing from the east, driven by revenge for Nazi atrocities in their own lands. Hitler launched his final attack in the Ardennes as a desperate gamble to split the Allied ranks. The attack failed and fuel reserves ran out, making everyone realize the end was just time. Hitler retreated to his final lair beneath Berlin in the Führer bunker, surrounded by concrete and total despair. The tone of his voice in final speeches shifted from powerful hysteria to brokenness and blame. He began blaming the German people for the defeat, claiming they did not deserve his greatness. His health deteriorated rapidly, and he became tremulous and walked with great difficulty like an old man. He spent his hours moving imaginary armies on maps that no longer existed on the real ground. He ordered the Nero Decree to destroy Germany's infrastructure so the enemy could never benefit from it. Some leaders disobeyed his orders to destroy Germany, realizing the man had lost his mind and balance. He celebrated his last birthday in the bunker while Soviet artillery shelled the center of Berlin. He went out for the last time to honor child soldiers, embodying the peak of Nazi madness. The smell of death filled the narrow bunker corridors as Russian soldiers approached the ruined chancellery. He received news of Mussolini's execution and the desecration of his body, increasing his suicidal resolve. Hitler decided to marry his companion Eva Braun in a simple, somber ceremony beneath the heavy shelling. He wrote his final political testament, blaming Jews and politicians for the war and Germany's ruin. On the 30th of April 1945, Hitler decided to end his life and his wife's. They took poison and Hitler shot himself in the head, ending a chapter of human blood. He ordered his body to be burned in the garden so it wouldn't be a trophy. Berlin fell 2 days after his suicide, and Germany declared an unconditional surrender in the war. Hitler left behind a destroyed continent, millions dead, and a name forever linked to absolute evil. The myth of the 1,000-year Reich ended in just 12 years of fire and absolute darkness. The story of his rise and fall remains a harsh lesson about the danger of dictatorship. The bunker that witnessed his last breaths was turned into a parking lot to erase his trace. But history does not forget the man who started with a brush and ended burning the world. The coincidences that brought him to power were a curse on all of humanity and its peace. His memory remains a permanent warning that monsters are made by broken souls and silent witnesses. The curtain closed on Adolf Hitler's life, and Europe began a long, painful journey of recovery. The images of the concentration camps became the true legacy he left for the world to see. The psychological shift from dreamer to destroyer remains a puzzle that psychologists try to solve today. Hitler died, but the ghosts of his victims haunt his memory in every dark historical page. Thus ended the tale of the corporal who wanted the world but found only shameful death. Human history is not just folded pages, but a mirror reflecting the past to protect the future. At the end of this dark journey, we realize that hatred starts with a word and ends in ruin. Never forget that true monsters do not live in forests, but are born from human silence. Share with us in the comments which coincidence you think was the most influential in Hitler's life. If you like this deep and detailed historical narrative, do not forget to like and subscribe. Activate the notification bell to be the first to watch our upcoming documentaries revealing hidden history. Thank you for your sophisticated follow-up and the precious time you spent with us in this film. We meet again with another story that changed the world and left its mark on memory. This was the story of the man who wanted the earth but lost his very soul. Until we meet in a new historical adventure where we reveal what lies behind the heavy curtain.